Cléopâtre-Diane de Mérode has been identified as one of the first celebrity icons of the modern world. Beginning in the 1890s in Belle Epoque Paris, she became one of Europe's most recognisable figures in the pre-First World War period. But there was a greater complexity to her than the paintings and photographs of her suppose. Here we tell her full story. Cléopâtre-Diane de Mérode was born on the 27th of September 1875 in Paris into an aristocratic family, one with a background in the arts and performance. Her parents were the Austrian-born judge Theodore Christomanos and an Austrian baroness by the name of Vincentia Maria Cassilia Catharina de Mérode. However, the young Cleo's parents were estranged, and she was raised exclusively by her mother. In fact, she would not have her first meeting with her father until she was in her early adult years. Much of Cleo's future life was shaped by her mother's influence. When she was just 8 years old, the Baroness enrolled her daughter in ballet classes. As a consequence, Cleo made her first appearance on the Parisian stage in 1886, when she was just around 11 years of age. Already by the time that she entered her teenage years, she was garnering attention in Parisian stage circles. Her signature hairstyle, the chignon, was particularly noted in Parisian performance circles. In later years, the hairstyle became so popular that it nearly instigated a strike amongst female workers in early 20th century Sweden when they were ordered to cease wearing their hair to work in the chignon. It is a striking statement of the popularity which Cleo would subsequently enjoy. Cleo was emerging into Parisian society at a time when the city was the centre of the Belle Epoque, meaning the beautiful epoch in France. This lasted from the period of the end of the Franco-Prussian War in 1871, and with it, the commencement of the Third French Republic, through to the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. It is typically understood as an era in which the first age of globalization was occurring, bringing unprecedented wealth to Europe and North America. As great technological progress and scientific breakthroughs occurred, the continent was filled with a confidence in its own material progress, one which was reflected in the vibrancy of its culture. Paris was understood to be the cultural capital of this first age of globalization. A great proportion of the world's foremost writers and artists, including Victor Hugo, Émile Zola, and Oscar Wilde, worked here or gravitated towards the city, and so many of these spent their time at the dance clubs of the city. These clubs were widely popular, and many new stars were on the rise. And it was this world that Cléopâtre-Diane de Mérode was entering in the 1880s and 1890s. Yet, little did she know that her popularity would reach unprecedented levels never before seen. Cleo's stage career took off in the 1890s. As it was, her great beauty quickly gained the attention of some of the most celebrated artists and photographers of the Belle Epoque. These included the famed painter and sculptor Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, much of whose work focused on ballet dancers, and the French Impressionist painter Edgar Degas. But while these were just two of the most celebrated such depictors of de Mérode, many others also painted her, and other sculptors also produced likenesses of her. Without a doubt, there was a striking array of France's most celebrated artists, all of whom had produced images and likenesses of the same woman. Yet, while such depictions were doubtlessly significant, these could only be viewed by a certain amount of people. De Mérode's position as a celebrity icon truly stems from her regular appearance in more widely distributed media. She appeared regularly in the Parisian and French newspapers, and occasionally too in international outlets, while she was also an omnipresent figure in magazines, cartoons, and even postcards of the era. The famed caricaturist Georges Gaussen, who produced his work under the name Sem, drew several caricatures of Cleo during the 1900s. Yet her fame was also built on her infamy. One early tale which emerged concerning her in French society was that she was missing a piece of an ear or had some other deformity which her elaborate hairstyles were concocted for in order to conceal. Others even suggested that her left ear was missing entirely, but the stories are untrue. The other scandal was much more inflammatory. Beginning in the autumn of 1895, a story began to circle around the Paris rumour mill that de Mérode, who was just 20 years of age at the time, was having an affair with King Leopold II of Belgium, a 60-year-old man who was also married and had 4 children. The Parisian, French and Belgian press quickly began referring to the pair as Cléopâtre, perhaps the first instance of celebrity name blending in modern times. There appears to have been no basis whatsoever to the rumour. Leopold was a serial philanderer and womanizer, and had indeed entered into an extramarital relationship with a French prostitute by the name of Caroline Lacroix around this time, but there is nothing to tie him to de Mérode. Despite this, the newspapers and cartoonists of Paris and wider Western European society continued to get mileage out of the story, and it was still being noted in the 1900s. It was not until the summer of 1911, when an investigative story appeared in the New York Times, that it was comprehensively disproved. In the late 1890s and 1900s, Cleo's fame saw her travelling beyond Paris and even France. She engaged in a tour of Europe in the first years of the century. In 1896, a New York newspaper had stated that her beauty is not only remarkable, judged by any standpoint, but it is of a type very different from that which is ordinarily offered to the eye of the pleasure-loving public. A suggestion of chastity, of melancholy, or even piety in the object of the Parisian's carnal admiration revives his jaded senses. Cleo de Mérode pleases this refined Parisian taste. We find her a year later visiting New York on a tour in which she performed extensively. These, however, were something of a critical disappointment. Cleo was probably unperturbed by this critical response though. Such was the wealth of American society during the Gilded Age of the late 19th century that she was able to make 40 times more performing in New York than what she made at the Paris Opera back in France. De Mérode was, in any event, dismissive of the critics, stating that the papers stated that I was a failure, but they lied. I pleased the Americans vastly. The papers pretended that I danced badly, as if Americans could tell. They know nothing about dancing, and don't like ballets. In any event, the tour culminated with Cleo being voted the most beautiful woman in Paris at the New York Camera Club in 1898. Further tours to London in 1902 and across Europe in the 1900s were more critically successful. Despite her reputation as a great beauty, de Mérode's own love life was relatively muted. She lived with her mother until Mrs. de Mérode died in 1899. In an autobiography which she wrote in the twilight of her life, Cleo claimed that she was only ever romantically involved with 2 men. These were a French aristocrat of which little is known, other than that he died of typhoid fever, and the Spanish sculptor Luis de Perignac, whom Cleo was romantically linked to between 1906 and 1919, shortly before his death. Thereafter, there is little evidence of any relationships, and she died childless, leading some modern commentators to speculate that one of the most famed beauties of the late 19th and early 20th centuries was actually asexual. Throughout the 1900s and the early 1910s, she continued to garner widespread attention and performed in numerous prominent operas in Paris, notably La Danseuse de Pompée in 1912. Then, with the outbreak of the First World War in the summer of 1914, Europe's stage culture took an enormous hit. But de Mérode contributed to the French war cause by entertaining wounded soldiers who had returned to Paris from the Western Front just to the northeast. As she entered her 50s, de Mérode retired to the seaside town of Biarritz. Here she taught dance and crafted figurines as a hobby. She was also involved in 2 lawsuits during these years. In the early 1920s, she initiated proceedings against the distributors of the film Peacock Alley, a motion picture which had been a major hit in 1922. Cléo claimed that one of the film's characters, who not so subtly was called Cléo of Paris, was clearly modelled on her, and that the plotline had negatively affected her reputation. Specifically, it had suggested that she had produced an illegitimate child, but at the end of the trial, it was determined to rule against Cléo. Many years later, she was involved in the second major libel trial of her life. This one involved one of the foremost writers of the French existentialist movement, Simone de Beauvoir. At issue was Beauvoir's 1949 book, The Second Sex, which discusses the treatment of infamous women by society throughout history. In the course of this, de Beauvoir had described de Mérode as coming from a humble background and having become a prostitute. De Beauvoir then also mistakenly claimed that Cléo's name was a stage name designed to make her sound like an aristocrat. Cléo asked for millions of francs in damages for the insult to her reputation. However, while the judges found that de Beauvoir had indeed impugned her, they also determined that Cléo had substantially promoted rumours of this kind during her time on the Parisian stage, and that the libel claim for damages was consequently lacking grounds. They did, however, order that the relevant sections from The Second Sex were to be removed from future editions of the book. It was this incident which seems to have spurred Cléo, who was now in her 70s, to compose her own autobiography in an effort to restore her reputation. The resulting work, entitled Le Ballet de ma vie, or The Dance of My Life, was published in 1955. It provided a striking portrait not just of her own life, but Paris during the Belle Epoque. Cléo gave one last interview for Vogue magazine in 1964, when she was nearing her 90th birthday. She died 2.5 years later, on the 17th of October 1966 in Paris. She was interred at one of Paris's most famous cemeteries, Père Lachaise, alongside such famed individuals as Honoré de Balzac and Oscar Wilde. Overall, Cléo de Mérode was a pioneer of the concept of modern celebrity. She was one of the first individuals who were portrayed through such a wide array of mass media, which was becoming available during the late 19th century, with images of her appearing in everything from newspapers to postcards, and even eventually, the flourishing medium of video. In this sense, she was an early version of more ubiquitous figures such as Marilyn Monroe later in the 20th century, but much of her own life remains quite obscure and shrouded in mystery. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Cléopâtre de Mérode. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave me a like and a comment down below, and if you have any suggestions, be sure to leave them in the comments. I hope you guys have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.